You always were too smart for your own good, Evie. The words hit me like ice water as Walter, my husband of 45 years, speaks with a clarity I haven't heard in months. I'm standing in my kitchen, holding bank statements showing our retirement account drained from $425,000 to $47,000, while the man I've been caring for through dementia just revealed a mind that's working perfectly well. The morning routine had become second nature after 2 years of caregiving. I'd been crushing his medications into applesauce, arranging vitamins, preparing coffee exactly how he'd always liked it. When the stack of hidden bank statements fell from behind the coffee canister, papers showing systematic transfers I never authorized. "Walter, what did you just say?" My voice comes out sharper than intended, cutting through the confused fog he's been performing for 24 months. The clarity vanishes as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar vacant stare. "I'm sorry, dear. I don't know what you're talking about. Are you feeling all right? You look confused." Confused. The word he's been using more and more lately to describe me, while I've been questioning my own sanity and wondering if I'm losing my mind along with him. My name is Evelyn Patterson. I'm 71 years old, and this is the story of how my husband systematically manipulated me while I cared for his fake illness, and how I used my nursing expertise to expose his deception and reclaim my independence. If this situation resonates with your soul, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I stare at the bank statements with trembling hands, my 48 years of nursing experience screaming warnings I've been ignoring. Transfer after transfer, all authorized by Walter's signature, all dated within the past 18 months, the same period when he supposedly couldn't remember my name half the days. "Walter, do you remember signing these transfer authorizations?" "I don't remember signing anything." He moves closer, and I catch a whiff of expensive cologne. Cologne I didn't buy him, that we couldn't afford on our fixed income. "Ivy, you've been having these episodes lately. Maybe you should sit down." Episodes. Another word that's crept into our conversations, always delivered with that concerned, patronizing tone that makes me feel like I'm the one losing my mind. But my nursing training is kicking in like muscle memory. The dizziness, the confusion, the memory lapses that have been getting worse over the past year. All symptoms that could be caused by medication. Medication that someone with access to my food and drink could easily administer. I look at my coffee mug sitting on the counter. The coffee I've been drinking every morning while preparing his medications. The coffee that's been tasting slightly bitter lately, despite the cream and sugar. "Walter," I say slowly, my voice steadier than it's been in months. "I think we need to have a very different conversation." For just a second, I see it again, that flash of awareness, of calculation, of a mind that's working perfectly well. The same mind that's been systematically draining our retirement accounts while convincing me I'm having mental episodes. "I need to call the bank," I announce, reaching for the phone. "Ivy, you're getting yourself worked up over nothing. Why don't you have some coffee and calm down?" Coffee. The same coffee that's been making me increasingly dizzy, increasingly confused, increasingly unable to trust my own perceptions about my husband's miraculous moments of clarity. I look at Walter, this man I've devoted my life to, whose parents I cared for until they died, whose failed business ventures I funded with my nursing salary, and feel the ground shift beneath my feet. The devoted caregiver who's been questioning her own sanity is gone. The registered nurse who's just diagnosed systematic poisoning and financial fraud has taken her place, and she remembers exactly how to protect vulnerable patients from predators. I didn't drink the coffee. For the first time in months, I poured it down the sink and made fresh coffee from a new container I found in the pantry. Within an hour, the persistent fog that had been clouding my thoughts began to lift like morning mist. Walter had retreated to his recliner, resuming his vacant stare at the television. But I was watching him now with different eyes, the eyes of a nurse who'd spent 48 years recognizing when patients were faking symptoms. I called the bank from my bedroom, speaking quietly while Walter remained downstairs. "Mrs. Patterson, I can confirm those transfers were all authorized using your husband's power of attorney," the customer service representative explained. "The documentation appears to be in order." "When was the power of attorney established?" "Let me check. January 15th, 2 years ago. 2 weeks after Walter's supposed dementia diagnosis. 2 weeks after I'd been so devastated by his condition that I'd barely been able to function. Can you tell me the total amount transferred in the past 18 months? The pause felt eternal. $78,000. Ma'am. I sank onto the bed, my legs giving out. Not just the retirement account, he'd been systematically draining everything. Our savings, my pension fund, even the emergency account I'd built up over decades of careful nursing. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of our bedroom and forced myself to think like the medical professional I'd been trained to be. Symptoms, timeline, pattern recognition. The dizziness had started about a year ago, the memory lapses shortly after, the increasing confusion that made me question my own perceptions, all coinciding with Walter's supposed worsening condition and my increased dependence on his help with daily decisions. I walked to the kitchen and examined my coffee mug under the bright overhead light. There, barely visible around the rim, was a faint residue that shouldn't have been there. I scraped some into a small container, old habits from my nursing days when we'd had to collect evidence of suspected poisoning cases. The front door opened, and I quickly hid the container as footsteps approached. "Mrs. Patterson?" A woman's voice, cheerful and professional. "It's Thelma. I'm here for Mr. Patterson's afternoon session." Thelma Brooks, the home health aide I'd hired 6 months ago when Walter's care became too much for me to handle alone. A godsend, I'd thought, someone trained to help with dementia patients while I caught my breath. "He's in the living room," I called, watching from the kitchen doorway as she greeted Walter. "How are we feeling today, Walter?" Her voice carried that practiced cheerfulness of healthcare workers. "Better, actually." Walter's response was immediate, clear, engaged. Much better. I froze. This was the man who'd spent the morning staring blankly at the television, who'd claimed not to understand bank statements, who supposedly couldn't remember my name half the time. "That's wonderful. Are you ready for your walk?" "Walk?" Walter hadn't been on a walk in months. I'd been told his mobility was too compromised, his confusion too severe to safely leave the house. I watched through the window as they headed down the street together. Walter's gait was steady, confident. He was gesturing animatedly, clearly engaged in conversation. This wasn't the shuffling, uncertain man I'd been caring for. 20 minutes later, they returned, and I pretended to be busy in the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see Thelma helping Walter to his chair, her hand lingering on his shoulder longer than necessary. The gesture was intimate, familiar. "Same time Thursday?" she asked, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed personal rather than professional. "Wouldn't miss it," Walter replied, and I heard something in his tone I hadn't heard in 2 years. Happiness, anticipation, the voice of a man very much in control of his faculties. After Thelma left, I confronted Walter directly. "You seemed very alert during your session." "Did I?" The vacant expression slipped back into place like a well-practiced mask. "I don't really remember. These episodes come and go." Episodes. That word again, now applied to his moments of clarity rather than confusion. "Walter, I want to discuss our finances." "Evie, you know I can't handle that anymore. That's why we have the power of attorney arrangement." "The arrangement I don't remember agreeing to." "You were very upset about my diagnosis. You said you couldn't bear to make decisions about our future." His voice took on that patient, condescending tone. "Maybe you should talk to Dr. Morrison about these memory issues you've been having." Memory issues. Now, I was the one with cognitive problems, according to the man who'd supposedly forgotten how to tie his shoes. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I stayed awake after Walter went to bed. At 11 p.m., I heard his bedroom door open, footsteps in the hallway, then the soft sound of the back door closing. I looked out the window and saw Walter walking across our backyard with the confident stride of a healthy man. He disappeared into the guest house we'd converted for storage years ago. Light appeared in the guest house windows, then shadows, 2 figures moving around inside. Walter wasn't alone. I grabbed my phone and crept outside, staying in the shadows of our garden. Through the guest house window, I could see Walter and Thelma sitting close together on a couch I didn't remember putting there. They were drinking wine, laughing, completely relaxed, completely normal. I took photos with my phone. my hands steady for the first time in months. The evidence was undeniable. My husband's dementia was an elaborate performance, and his home health aide was his accomplice. As I watched them together, pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The expensive cologne, the missing money, the systematic drugging that made me question my own sanity. The power of attorney signed when I was too devastated to think clearly. Walter hadn't developed dementia. He'd developed a plan to steal our retirement and gaslight me into believing I was the one losing my mind. And I'd been paying Thelma to help him do it. I crept back to the house, my mind racing with the implications. How long had this been going on? How much more money was at risk? And most importantly, what were they planning to do with me once they'd taken everything? The coffee residue in my kitchen suddenly felt a lot more sinister. They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my sanity, my credibility, my ability to fight back. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd chosen to victimize a nurse who'd spent her entire career protecting vulnerable patients from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. The patient advocate in me was waking up, and she was furious. The next morning, I pretended to drink my coffee while secretly pouring it into a plant. Within hours, my mind felt sharper than it had in months. I was finally thinking clearly enough to be terrified by how unclear I'd been. I waited until Walter was in his afternoon nap, which I now suspected was actually time spent texting or planning, before searching the guest house. What I found made my blood run cold. The space had been completely furnished as a second home. A bed with rumpled sheets, a kitchenette stocked with food, women's clothing in the closet, expensive pieces I'd never seen Thelma wear during her professional visits. But it was the paperwork on the makeshift desk that stopped my heart. Financial documents showing the systematic transfer of our assets, real estate listings for our family home, and most chilling of all, brochures for memory care facilities with my name written on sticky notes attached to the pages. Evelyn Patterson, early onset dementia, requires 24-hour supervision. My hands shook as I photographed everything with my phone. They weren't just stealing my money, they were planning to have me institutionalized. I found Walter's real phone hidden in a drawer, not the basic model he carried around the house claiming he couldn't figure out how to use it. This phone was full of text messages that made me physically sick. Thelma, how much longer do we need to keep this up? Walter, not much longer. Her confusion is getting worse. Dr. Morrison is already concerned about her memory issues. Thelma, the coffee doses are working perfectly. She can barely think straight anymore. Walter, once we get her committed, the house and all remaining accounts transfer to me as her guardian. Then we're free. I screenshot every message, my nursing training kicking in to document evidence systematically. But it was the final exchange that made me understand the full scope of their plan. Thelma, what if she figures it out? Walter, she won't. I've been telling everyone she's having episodes for months. Even her old nursing friends think she's losing it. Who's going to believe a confused old woman over her devoted husband and healthcare provider? Thelma, you're right. Besides, the medication doses can always be increased if needed. Increased. They were prepared to drug me into complete incapacity if I got too close to the truth. I sat in that guest house, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate betrayal I could imagine, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had been suffocating me for months lifted completely, replaced by the cold, analytical clarity I'd relied on during medical emergencies. This wasn't love gone wrong. This wasn't even simple theft. This was a calculated conspiracy to destroy my mind, steal my life's work, and lock me away where I could never expose them. I heard footsteps approaching and quickly hid the phone, slipping out the back door of the guest house just as Walter appeared around the corner. Evie, what are you doing out here? Just getting some fresh air. The house felt stuffy. I kept my voice level, casual, even as my heart pounded.
You look confused again. Maybe you should come inside and rest.
Confused, the word that had been my prison for months now, felt like a weapon being used against me.
You're right. I do feel a bit foggy. I let him guide me back to the house, playing the role of the confused wife while my mind raced with plans. He thought he was leading a helpless victim.
He was actually walking beside a nurse who'd spent 48 years recognizing predatory behavior and protecting vulnerable patients. That evening, I called my former colleague Margaret Chen, now retired but still sharp as ever. "Evie, how are you holding up with Walter's condition?" "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Do you remember how we used to identify family members who were abusing dementia patients?" "Of course. Why?" "Because I think I'm being abused, and I need someone I trust to help me think this through." I told her everything: the missing money, the drugged coffee, the fake symptoms, the conspiracy I'd uncovered. Margaret listened with the professional attention of someone who'd seen it all during her nursing career. "Ivy, this is textbook elder abuse with a sophisticated twist. They're using your medical knowledge against you, making you doubt your own professional instincts." "What do I do?" "First, we document everything. Second, we get you medical testing to prove you're being drugged. Third, we expose them before they can escalate." "Escalate?" "Honey, if they're planning to have you committed, they're not going to stop at coffee additives. The medication doses can be increased, like that text said. You could end up in a vegetative state." The reality hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just planning to steal from me, they were planning to chemically lobotomize me to cover their tracks. "Margaret, I'm scared." "You should be. But you're also a nurse who spent decades protecting people from exactly this kind of predator. You know what to do." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd been systematically poisoned for months, and felt the last vestiges of the confused, helpless woman I'd become fall away. Walter thought he was dealing with a deteriorating old woman whose mind was failing. Thelma thought she was manipulating a vulnerable patient. They were both about to discover they'd been systematically abusing a healthcare professional who'd spent her entire career learning how to fight back against people exactly like them. I looked at the coffee maker where they'd been drugging me, at the pill organizer where I'd been carefully managing Walter's fake medications, at the phone where I now had evidence of their conspiracy. Tomorrow, Walter would wake up expecting to continue his performance as a confused dementia patient while his accomplice continued poisoning his wife. Instead, he was going to discover that his victim had become his worst nightmare, a nurse who knew exactly what he'd done and exactly how to prove it. The patient advocate in me was fully awake now, and she was ready for war. The next morning, I did what I'd done for 48 years when faced with a complex medical case. I created a systematic documentation plan. My sewing room became my command center, hidden from Walter's view, but equipped with everything I needed to build an airtight case. I started with the coffee residue I'd collected, sealing it in a sterile container I'd kept from my nursing days. Then I documented my symptoms over the past year, cross-referencing them with known effects of common sedatives and cognitive suppressants. The pattern was textbook, systematic drugging designed to create confusion and memory loss. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. Margaret arrived at noon, bringing her daughter Lisa, who worked as a forensic nurse. We sat in my sewing room like we were planning the most important patient care conference of our careers. "First, we need to test your blood and urine for drugs," Lisa explained, pulling out collection kits. "If they've been medicating you regularly, there should still be traces." "What about the coffee residue?" "We'll test that too. If it contains sedatives or cognitive suppressants, that's direct evidence of poisoning." While Lisa prepared the samples, Margaret and I reviewed the evidence I'd gathered. The bank statements, the text messages, the photos from the guest house. "This is extensive fraud," Margaret said, her voice grim. "But Evie, we need to be careful. If they suspect you're onto them, they might escalate the drugging or move faster on the commitment proceedings." "What do you mean?" "Walter's been building a case for your incompetence for months. If he files emergency guardianship papers claiming you're a danger to yourself, he could have you committed within days." The thought sent ice through my veins. "How do we prevent that?" "We get ahead of it. We document your complete mental competence, expose their conspiracy, and file criminal charges before they can make their next move." Lisa looked up from the sample containers. "There's something else. If they're planning to increase medication doses, we need to act fast. Prolonged exposure to these drugs can cause permanent cognitive damage." "Permanent damage?" They weren't just planning to steal my money and freedom. They were prepared to destroy my mind permanently to cover their tracks. "What's our timeline?"
I can have the lab results by tomorrow morning, Lisa said. But we need to plan the confrontation carefully. You'll need witnesses, preferably medical professionals who can attest to your competence. That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls that felt like assembling a medical team for the most important case of my career. Dr. Patricia Williams, the geriatrician who'd been treating Walter's dementia. Dr. Morrison, my own physician who'd been concerned about my recent confusion. My son David, flying in from Seattle. My daughter Karen, driving up from Portland. I told them all the same thing. Walter was having a crisis, and we needed a family meeting to discuss his care options. What I didn't tell them was that the crisis was entirely different from what they expected. "Mom, are you sure you're up for this?" David asked when I called him. "You've seemed so overwhelmed lately when we've talked." Overwhelmed, another word that had been used to describe my drugged state, another piece of evidence that Walter's gaslighting had been working on everyone around me. "I'm feeling much clearer now, David. Clearer than I have in months." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I cooked a real dinner. Without the daily drugging, my energy and focus had returned dramatically. I felt like myself again for the first time in months. Walter seemed surprised by the elaborate meal. "You're feeling better today." "Much better. I think I'm finally adjusting to everything." "That's good. I was worried about you." His concern sounded genuine, which made it even more chilling. He could fake dementia for 2 years and express loving concern for the woman he was systematically poisoning. "Walter, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about my memory issues." "Oh, I think you're right. I should probably see Dr. Morrison about it. Maybe get some tests done." I watched his face carefully. For just a moment, I saw something flicker. Concern, calculation, maybe fear. That's probably a good idea. But let's not rush into anything. These things take time to develop." "Actually, I already called him. He wants to see me tomorrow morning. He's also suggested we have a family meeting about your care. David and Karen are coming." Walter's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "A family meeting? To discuss your condition, your care needs. Dr. Williams will be there too, to explain your prognosis and treatment options." "I don't think that's necessary." "Walter, we need to plan for the future. Your condition is progressing, and I can't handle everything alone anymore." I kept my voice gentle, caring, the devoted wife discussing her husband's tragic decline. What I was actually doing was setting the stage for the most important confrontation of my life.
"When is this meeting?"
"Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock, here at the house." After dinner, I watched Walter retreat to his room earlier than usual. Through my bedroom window, I saw him slip out to the guest house, probably to warn Thelma about the family meeting. Let him warn her. Let them both panic and make mistakes. Let them try to figure out how to maintain their elaborate deception in front of medical professionals and family members. I spent the evening reviewing my evidence one final time. The lab results would be ready in the morning. The family would arrive by afternoon. Dr. Williams and Dr. Morrison would witness whatever happened next. Walter thought he was facing a routine family discussion about his fake condition. What he was actually facing was a room full of witnesses who were about to learn that the confused, declining wife they'd been worried about was actually the victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. Tomorrow, the devoted husband caring for his demented wife would be exposed as a predator who'd been systematically destroying the woman who'd loved him for 45 years. The nurse in me was ready to protect her most important patient, herself. The family meeting was set for 2 o'clock, but I had the lab results by 10 a.m. Lisa called with confirmation that made my hands shake with rage rather than medication. "Evie, your blood shows significant levels of lorazepam and diphenhydramine. These are powerful sedatives that would absolutely cause the confusion and memory issues you've been experiencing. How long would I have been taking these to reach these levels? Based on the concentrations, I'd say daily dosing for at least a year, possibly longer."
A year of systematic poisoning. A year of questioning my own sanity while my husband and his mistress slowly destroyed my mind.
The coffee residue tested positive for the same compounds. This is clear evidence of deliberate drugging.
By noon, everyone had arrived. David and Karen sat in the living room. looking concerned and confused. Dr. Williams had brought Walter's medical files. Dr. Morrison carried his notes about my recent cognitive concerns. Walter sat in his usual chair, playing the confused patient perfectly.
Thelma had arrived for her scheduled session, looking nervous but maintaining her professional demeanor.
"Thank you all for coming," I began, standing in front of the fireplace with a folder of documents in my hands. "I know you're here to discuss Walter's condition and my ability to care for him." "Mom, we're just worried about you both," Karen said gently. "You've seemed so overwhelmed lately." "I have been overwhelmed, but not for the reasons you think." I opened my folder and pulled out the lab results. "Dr. Morrison, could you please review these blood test results?" He scanned the document, his eyebrows rising. "Evelyn, these show significant levels of sedatives in your system. Are you taking medication I don't know about?" "No, but someone has been giving me medication I don't know about." I looked directly at Walter, who was maintaining his vacant expression. "For over a year, someone has been drugging my coffee with sedatives to make me appear confused and incompetent." The room went silent. David and Karen exchanged shocked glances. "Mom, that's a serious accusation," David said carefully. "It's a serious crime." I pulled out the photos from Walter's hidden phone. "Dr. Williams, you've been treating Walter for dementia for 2 years. Can you explain how a man with advanced cognitive decline can send text messages like these?" I handed her printouts of the messages between Walter and Thelma. Her face went pale as she read. "These messages discuss drugging you, stealing your money, and having you committed." Dr. Williams looked at Walter with growing alarm. "Walter, can you explain these?" Walter maintained his confused expression, but I saw sweat beading on his forehead. I don't understand what you're showing me." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and played a recording I'd made that morning. "Then explain this." Walter's voice came through the speaker, clear and articulate. "Thelma, we need to be more careful. Evie's been asking too many questions. Maybe we should increase the coffee doses until after the family meeting." The recording had been easy to make once I'd figured out his pattern. He dropped the Dementia Act completely when he thought I was out of earshot. I don't remember." Walter's facade was cracking. "Walter," Dr. Williams said sharply, "that recording shows clear cognitive function. Either you've made a miraculous recovery, or you've been faking your symptoms." Thelma stood up abruptly. "I should go. This seems like a family matter." "Sit down, Thelma." My voice carried the authority of 48 years in healthcare. "You're not going anywhere." "Mom, who is this woman?" Karen asked. "This is Thelma Brooks, the home health aide I hired to help with Walter's care. She's also Walter's mistress, his co-conspirator, and the person who's been helping him steal our retirement money." I pulled out the bank statements, the photos from the guest house, the evidence of their affair and conspiracy. Over the past 18 months, they've stolen $378,000 from our accounts while systematically drugging me to make me appear incompetent. Their plan was to have me committed to a memory care facility so Walter could gain complete control of our assets. Dr. Morrison was studying the lab results again. "Evelyn, the levels of sedatives in your system are dangerous. Prolonged exposure could cause permanent cognitive damage," which was exactly their intention. I looked at Walter, who had abandoned his confused act entirely. "Wasn't it, Walter?" "You don't understand," he said, his voice clear and desperate. "I was in debt, serious debt. You needed to destroy your wife's mind to steal her life savings." I turned to address the room. For 2 years, I've been questioning my own sanity, wondering if I was developing dementia like my husband. Instead, I was being systematically poisoned by the 2 people I trusted most. Thelma made a move toward the door, but David blocked her path. "Dr. Williams," I continued, "I assume Walter's medical records show a pattern of declining cognitive function?" "Yes, but..." She was staring at Walter with professional horror. "If you've been faking these symptoms, this represents massive medical fraud. It represents attempted murder," Dr. Morrison said grimly. "These drug levels could have killed you, Evelyn." I pulled out the final document, the police report I'd filed that morning with Margaret's help, which is why I've already contacted the authorities. Detective Sarah Chen is on her way to arrest both Walter and Thelma for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Walter's face had gone gray, Vivi, please, we can work this out. I'm your husband.
You were my husband. Now you're just a criminal who tried to steal my mind along with my money. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The bank accounts have been frozen, the stolen money is being recovered, and both of you will be facing serious prison time. I looked at this man I'd loved for 45 years, who'd been willing to destroy me completely for money. I spent my career protecting vulnerable patients from predators, exactly like you. The sirens stopped outside our house. Today, I protected myself. As the police led Walter and Thelma away in handcuffs, I stood in my living room surrounded by my children and the medical professionals who'd witnessed the truth. For the first time in over a year, my mind was completely clear. My body was free of drugs, and my future was my own. The devoted wife was gone. The nurse who fought for justice had taken her place. 8 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee, real coffee, untainted by sedatives, and marveled at how different everything felt. The morning sunlight seemed brighter, my thoughts clearer, my movements steadier. It was remarkable how much of my supposed aging had actually been systematic poisoning. The criminal trial had concluded last month. Walter received 5 years for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Thelma got 3 years as an accomplice. More importantly, I'd recovered $340,000 of the stolen money, and the house was secure in my name alone.
But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was personal.
My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Margaret, calling with her weekly check-in that had become one of my favorite parts of the week.
How are you feeling, Evie?
Like myself again. Actually, like a better version of myself. I settled into my kitchen chair, the same spot where I discovered those first bank statements. I have energy I haven't felt in years. That's what happens when you stop being systematically drugged by your spouse. The dark humor still caught me off guard sometimes, but I'd learned to appreciate it. Laughter was part of healing.
Margaret, I got another call yesterday. A woman in Portland whose husband claims he has early onset Alzheimer's, but she's finding financial discrepancies.
Are you going to help her?
I already am. I'm driving down there tomorrow.
Over the past 6 months, I'd become something I'd never expected, an expert in spousal elder abuse. Word had spread through nursing networks, senior centers, and legal advocacy groups about the woman who'd exposed her husband's elaborate deception. Now I received calls weekly from people who suspected similar situations.
You've found your calling, Margaret observed. I've found my purpose. Turns out, 48 years of nursing was perfect training for this work. That afternoon, I met with Dr. Patricia Williams, who'd become both my therapist and my collaborator in developing educational materials about spousal abuse in older adults.
How are you processing the anniversary? She asked.
Tomorrow marked 1 year since I'd discovered those first bank statements, a year since my world had collapsed and rebuilt itself into something stronger.
I'm grateful, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Not for what Walter did, but for what I discovered I could do.
Tell me more about that.
I spent 45 years being a good wife, which I thought meant putting his needs first, trusting his judgment, making excuses for his behavior. I looked out her office window at the city where I'd built a new life. I confused love with accommodation, loyalty with enabling. And now I know the difference. Love doesn't require you to ignore red flags. Loyalty doesn't mean accepting abuse. Being a good partner doesn't mean being a convenient victim. Dr. Williams smiled. That's wisdom that could help a lot of people.
That evening, I did something that had become a weekly ritual. I called my daughter Karen, who'd moved back to town after the trial to be closer to me.
Mom, you sound happy. I am happy, genuinely happy, maybe for the first time in years, even after everything that happened, especially after everything that happened. Karen, I spent decades thinking my value came from how well I took care of other people. I never learned to take care of myself. You're certainly making up for lost time now. She was right. I'd joined a hiking group, started taking art classes, and was planning a trip to Ireland I'd been postponing for 20 years. At 71, I was finally living for myself.
There's something else, I told her. I've been asked to speak at the state nursing conference next month about recognizing elder abuse.
Mom, That's wonderful. They want me to share my story, to help other healthcare professionals recognize the signs we missed. I paused, thinking about the irony. I spent my career protecting vulnerable patients, but I couldn't protect myself until I remembered I was worth protecting. The next morning, the anniversary, I woke up without an alarm for the first time in decades. No medications to prepare, no fake symptoms to accommodate, no walking on eggshells around someone else's manufactured reality. I made coffee and sat in my garden, reading the newspaper and planning my day. Simple pleasures that had been stolen from me and were now mine again. My phone buzzed with a text from the woman in Portland. "Ivy, I followed your advice and tested my coffee. You were right. Thank you for saving my life." I smiled and typed back, "You saved your own life. I just reminded you that you could." That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where I'd buried the marriage I'd thought I had. Not Walter, he was very much alive in prison, but the illusion of the partnership I'd believed in for 45 years. I stood at the small memorial stone I'd placed there, engraved with a simple message. Here lies the woman who thought love meant accepting anything. She learned better. As the sun set, I thought about the future for the first time in years without fear. My health was excellent, my finances were secure, and my purpose was clear. I had work to do, people to help, stories to tell, lives to save. Walter had tried to steal my money, my home, my sanity, and my future. Instead, he'd accidentally given me the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that I was strong enough to save myself. And now I was strong enough to help others do the same. I drove home to my house, and prepared for tomorrow's trip to Portland. Another woman needed to remember who she was, and I was going to help her find her way back to herself. At 71, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of my life. Being a good nurse meant protecting the vulnerable, including the vulnerable woman in the mirror. And that made all the difference in the world.